Hello and welcome to the Arc Woman podcast. This is an exploration of womankind. Here we discuss what it is to be a woman in the modern world while utilizing ancient and modern modalities in tandem to create a bounty of health for the body, mind and spirit. G'day everyone and welcome back to the pod. It's been a big few weeks in the Arc Womanosphere. There is a few more people finding out about my podcast. There is working on a few different projects that are yet to be released. There are some amazing interviews that I've planned coming up with world-leading cardiologists and amazing midwives, and the list could go on. I feel so lucky that this is a part of my job, that I get to interview incredible people and learn from them. But today was going to be more of a personal journey, and I'm going to be interweaving data and interesting facts around the veganosphere, its rise, its fall, and how many of us women got caught up in it. I definitely did. I was vegan for years. So let's start. I went fully vegetarian when I was 15, and then I went fully vegan in my early 20s. And it was not really, fully vegan, vegetarian at 15 for 5 years. And then in my early 20s went full vegan. I lived in the Netherlands. I moved to Canada. There were some times when I was camping when the only thing you could eat was jerky. You know what I mean? So for the most part, when I was 15, I was vegan stringently for about 3 years. And then as I was traveling, as I was like 18, 19, 20, up to 21, 22, 23, 24, I would say, I was, flexitarian, mostly vegetarian. And when I could afford to do so, I was vegan. I was so caught up in the movement at the time. It's very idealistic. It's motivated by idealism and compassion. And I was so into it. I was that vegan putting stickers on on meat. I was going to protests. I was wearing only vegan shirts. I wouldn't date any man who ate meat. I was vegan, which I find so funny because when you tell someone who is currently vegan and is in that sphere, I used to be vegan, they always say, no, you weren't. Girl, yes, I was. I was a dickhead to be around. I really forced my beliefs down people's throats. I wasn't cool. I was not a cool vegan. Like, the vegans I know now are like, this is what I'm going to do. And I believe very deeply in this, but I'm not going to let it negatively impact my life, and I'm not going to be a dickhead. I was a total dickhead. And I'm not putting any hate out to vegans or vegetarians. If that's how you live for your life, that is fine. If it works for you, I fucking love that for you. That's really great. I wish it worked for me. It really didn't. In the first years, though, it really did. I felt light, energetic, and super healthy. I was an avid runner. At the time, both of my bosses were ultra marathon and marathon runners. So I got really into running culture. And when you're running, the thing that you run on is carbohydrates. So I was running huge distances because I had all of these, complex and simple carbohydrates at the ready because I was a vegan, and it was really, really great. I think Rich Roll is a good example of a vegan runner. You recover a lot better when you're vegan as well. Sometimes, I think in the first few years, and I was so into it. I was really into it. So I was running a lot. I was going to the gym. I was lifting weights as well, but that was just a support to my running. Okay. But as I said, I was zealous. I was in your face. I was convinced I found the true ethical path. I was watching documentaries. I was reading the books that really, really reinforced my sense of moral righteousness. And I was very eager to proclaim those virtues of veganism. And I believe that I was helping both animals and people. And, I still agree with that. I think vegetarians and vegans who do it for the animals and for the earth, I think that's a really beautiful plight. I think that is such a gorgeous way to see the world and do something good for the world. But as we'll find out at the end of this podcast, it might be a little bit misguided. And I was definitely vegan during the Freely, Banana, Ellen Fisher, Raw Christina. That's when I was living in Canada. That's when I was a runner, and that's when I was hardcore vegan. I think I was vegan all up for about 5 to 6 years. So a pretty good chunk of time. And it was really interesting because I was watching long-term vegans, Raw Alignment, I think is a good example. I think there's a few other ones who just gave up veganism because they started to see negative outcomes of their diet. I think Mick the vegan might come for me on this, but they had negative outcomes from their diet. And I saw the backlash from this community, which coincidentally really preached love and light. And they were really judged. These people who were like, this diet did not work for me, I'm falling sick. This was something that I remember back then in my mid-20s. I was like, that's weird. That's something that's a bit of a beige to red flag to me. And it really hinted at dogma. And then I felt it as well. So in my own later departure from veganism and then into vegetarianism, and then eventually I started to eat meat again, I really felt the critique sting. Back then I wasn't, in the public. I didn't have a large following or anything like that, but I had people around me, and I had, and I felt it from the community, the vegan cafes you weren't going to anymore. All of these things, the community really was quite stringent and was really quite judgmental when you go, I'm departing this movement because my health is being negatively impacted. And yeah, the reception is really quite nasty. So let's talk about the hidden health challenges I had. So about 2 to 3 years into my veganism journey, the cracks began to form in that bright picture that I had about veganism. And it started really, really subtly. I couldn't sleep. That was the biggest one. And it was really quite stark for me because I was running so much and I was so healthy. And, I had a full life. I had 2 huge friend groups. I had a full-time job. I was studying part-time. I was running, in my 20s, I was fucking hectic. I look back and I'm like, whoa, how did you do that? It was carbohydrates and veganism. But I couldn't sleep. Night after night, I was tossing and turning. My mind was racing, but my body was exhausted and refused to rest. Like at that point in time, I never struggled with insomnia. And alongside this, I also started to feel like really fatigued and mentally foggy during the day, which like as a nutrition student, like nearing the end of that like study period, I decided to practice what I preached. I like got my blood work done. I checked for deficiencies, and sure enough, that first red flag was vitamin B12. And that's something that a lot of vegans have to supplement with. But I found that funny because it was in my vegan protein powders, it was in my vegan multivitamin, and I was still low in B12. So I upped my dosage of B12, and I made sure that I was on top of iron and other things as well. This is really important. Studies show that nearly 50% of long-term vegetarians and 80% of vegans are deficient in B12. And that, when you look at those studies, those are disaggregated for people who are supplementing and who are not. And we are still seeing deficiencies in both groups. And the vegan machine will say, well, we see B12 deficiencies in people who are eating meat as well. And I would say, absolutely, I agree with you. The other thing that they would say as well is that like B12 is low in the soil, and so it has to be supplemented in the meat that we're eating anyway. And I say, I agree with you too. So not necessarily, B12 isn't necessarily, I would say, a vegan vegetarian problem. I think that is most people problem and a soil problem and an agricultural problem. But we do see it way more prevalent in vegan and vegetarian populations. Just to explain B12. So B12 is produced by soil bacteria and it's found in animal foods. It's really necessary for blood cell production and nervous system health. So when you don't supplement if you're vegetarian or vegan and you're listening to this, you're at very, very high risk. So the symptoms are fatigue, poor memory, nerve tingling, mood changes, and in my case, insomnia and brain fog. So those are some things that can come up first before you start to get the nerve tingles and poor memory and fatigue as well. So when I started to go, okay, whatever supplementation I'm taking at the moment isn't working, I took a higher dose of bioavailable B12, a more expensive brand. Back that time, I was a uni student. I didn't have that much money. So this is where the supplement investments started to happen, 2 to 3 years into this diet. And I started to feel better. So that was behind me. I was like, cool, done. Then another deficiency really emerged, and that's iron. And that's something to this day I still struggle with. I became weaker. I would walk up a flight of stairs and I would be lightheaded. I would stand and the room would like tilt into this dizzy spell. I felt like this overwhelming exhaustion and it clung to me at all times, like this really heavy blanket I couldn't throw off. And it didn't make sense to me because I was living this vegan lifestyle and I should feel amazing and I had felt amazing. So it was really, really quite confronting. And the thing that really made me go, this is serious, was my menstrual cycle. it was regular, like clockwork. So like every 28 days, I was that 15% statistic. I had it every 28 days. It became shorter. So my cycle became shorter and my period became shorter. So it used to be like 4 or 5 days. It was now 2 days. It was scant. It was erratic. It was a far cry from like that robust health, menstrual health that I had seen years prior when I was eating vegetarian. So that was a huge difference. So I did bloods. We weren't shocked to find that I was iron deficient. Many vegan women eventually will face this if you're not supplementing in iron. Iron from plant sources. I have a whole podcast on iron. So if you're interested in iron, please go listen to that. But iron from plant sources is non-heme and it's not easily absorbed as heme iron in meat. So I was eating a really carefully planned diet, studying nutrition at the time, and the nutrition course that I was doing, and in the research that I was doing on vegan plant-based diets at that point, the World Health Organization and the Australian Dietary Guidelines said, you can live a vegan lifestyle and it can be healthy. We accept this, but you need to do this, 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 and this. And they were like, okay, you need to eat beans. You need to be making sure you're eating beans and rice for amino acids. You need to be making sure you're supplementing iron and doing all these other things. And I was really, really careful with it. I was cooking on a cast iron pan. I had lots of greens and beans in my diet. I took the occasional iron supplement. As I said before, sometimes when you're taking a multi or when you're taking like protein powders, and they're vegan, very often they will have some type of micronutrient in there as well. But it wasn't enough. I was still really, really iron deficient. And that caused and added into the B12 symptoms that I was having as well. So the fatigue, the fogginess, the poor thinking, all of that. So in hindsight, it's really no wonder my body was really struggling. I had to cut out all the readily absorbed iron sources that I was eating on a vegetarian diet. And then when you went on a high fiber vegan diet that's really low in heme iron, of course, it was going to be depleted. Alongside that, my cycle just really suffered. So again, I really had regular periods. They became light, unpredictable. They sometimes went missing altogether. So that was a big thing for me. I was like, this is a huge problem. And generally, when we look at vegan and vegetarian diets, they are really low in zinc, iodine, vitamin A, sufficient protein, and this can all impair ovulation. This will all disrupt the balance of female hormones. So when I was experiencing this, and if you experience this, and if you're vegan and vegetarian, you're wondering if you want to eat meat, this is your body signaling that it's undernourished. If your body cannot cycle, it does not have an excess to produce another life, and you want to always have your body in a sense of abundance. Right? It felt like my head was wrapped in cotton. I would read textbooks that deficiencies in B12, iron, and omega 3 and fats could cause cognitive issues. But now I was really living it. And so what I kept doing was nothing is wrong with the vegan diet. That's what I kept thinking. Nothing can be wrong with this. Everyone around me is telling me that this diet is perfect. It is not flawed. It's the best for the environment. You're selfish if you don't do it. That's generally the messaging you get. And then it's very, very conflicting to go, well, I feel horrible. Okay, well, you need to find an algal supplement and you need to find an iron supplement and a B12 supplement. And while you're at it, supplement in vitamin C and zinc and iodine and omega 3s. You know what I mean? So in the end, I was the most expensive vegan, but I was still undernourished. And I was facing deterioration of my health. You have to understand, back then, my whole life was basically veganism. All my friends were vegan. I would go to vegan cafes. I would go to vegan meetups. I would go to vegan political events. I followed vegan accounts. I listened to only vegan podcasters. It was a religion. And it really goes into that 100-person theory of like when societies go over 100 people or 1,000 people, then you actually start to find these communities really rallying around an ideological way of thinking or being, or idealism as it is, to find community with one another because we're so desperate for community. And so that's what was going on. I had invested not just my diet, but my whole identity was veganism. And as my body was like crying out for health, I was really trying not to betray my deepest values. So around this time, when all of this was happening, I started farming. The money was way better than making coffee in vegan cafes. And I hoped that I was getting better and closer to the source of food production that would give me a little bit of insight. Because I'd studied nutrition at this point, and I was like, and I was vegan, and I thought I knew it all, but I was like, well, nutrition starts at the source, so I'm going to start farming. I had done some farming in high school. I'd done some potato farming, but I started to do garlic farming on like a permaculture garlic farm. I remember working and woofing on a permaculture plot and who did like a market garden. And then I went out and I did other farming, like broadacre cropping on a lentil and wheat farm. So I did it all. I did the broadacre cropping, I did the fruit farming, I did all of it. I really went into it because at the time it was way more money than I was making. I didn't feel ready to get into the nutrition sphere. And yeah, I was just done with working in vegan cafes that paid you $20 an hour. So this was really great. I was out in the fields, I was riding a tractor through rows of lentils and soybeans, and it was really confronting because I came to this truth. I came face to face with this truth that vegan diets are not bloodless diets. When you are clearing the land for crops and harvesting these crops, countless, and I mean hundreds per day, animals lose their lives. So, rabbits hiding in fields, you're running over like lizards, birds. You don't really consider these animals when you consider vegan lifestyle, but if you're telling vegans that nutritionally you need to eat rice, you need to eat lentils and soybeans for enough protein and iron. Cool. And you're thinking, this is so great. I'm sacrificing meat because I'm trying to help animals. What you don't realize is that actually is dangerous in its own way from an environmental perspective because yeah, you might not be killing agricultural animals, so like pigs, chickens, and cow, for example, but you're killing native animals. Every single day in that tractor, I was killing animals, hundreds per day, hundreds per day. I'm not even joking. And there are ones that are so important for an environment. And you have to think as well, when you're doing broadacre cropping, you are spraying tons of glyphosate, which I'll do a whole podcast on glyphosate one day. You are spraying so many different pesticides. You're spraying things on the crop to get them to ripen and finish up faster. Do you ever wonder why things come in seasons? Do you ever wonder why cherries all come into season at the right time? It's cherry season now in Tasmania. My tree that I don't spray with anything is still green. Everyone else's cherries are ready to go. And you might say, oh, it's just different species, it's different crops. No, I've worked in farmings. I know what they do. They can manipulate when plants fruit in accordance to demand. For Christmas in Australia, cherries are the thing. It was a really, really, really late season. Ask anyone in fruit at the moment in Australia, they will say it's been a hugely late season for Tasmania, New South Wales, etc., for most things, including berries specifically. How is it still on time? Because they were spraying something on the crop to get it to fruit on time so they could make their money. Going back to native animals. So I just want to read out a bit from my notes just for some stats. So billions of native and invasive species of animals are killed annually in crop production through habitat destruction, farm machinery, and pesticides. So a rough calculation used by some ecologists estimates that for every hectare of crop in cultivation, several small animals may be killed, either during field preparation or harvesting activities, which both involve machinery and pesticides. So this is only in Australia. For example, 40,000 ducks are shot each year to protect rice fields. 1 billion native mice are poisoned to safeguard grain stores. A farmer I read about put it bluntly, a duck dying to protect the rice paddy isn't much difference from a cow dying to produce a steak. Either way, an animal dies so we can eat. And so this is something that the vegan community is not really ready for. This is the part that the vegan community really rallies against, is this truth. And they will crunch the numbers. But I've been out on those tractors. I've worked alongside these farmers. And, that's anecdotal evidence on the evidence hierarchy pyramid that's at the lowest level. But it meant a lot to me, as someone who thought they were giving up so much for this diet, and to see that, oh, animals are still dying. It's just different animals. And in some ways, it could be worse because these animals are native. So as you can imagine, that ethical high ground that I had was really complex and grey all of a sudden. I thought it was black and white. If you ate meat, you were selfish, and if you didn't, you were righteous. That's how I thought. That's 24, 25-year-old Sarah. So, yeah, it really dawned on me that if my goal was to truly minimize animal suffering, there were alternate approaches. So, supporting farming methods that use one large animal to feed many people. So, for example, a single cow. Have you seen a cow close up? Have you seen one? Maybe pause this podcast and go find one. Huh? They're fucking massive. They provide hundreds of kilograms of meat. So enough to feed one person for an entire year, which translates to one animal death per year for that person. Still, that's 9 billion animals per year. Don't get me wrong. But that contrast with my lentils and veggies that I was eating, that quietly racks up to a far higher body count in unseed field animals. And that really poses the question, is one cow worth more than 40,000 native animals? And that's how I was thinking about it as I was driving on this tractor with my other vegan friend who was also having these realizations and having aha moments as well. I really want to point out this realization, and it still doesn't to this day, doesn't vindicate factory farming. I still absolutely abhor it. I think it's horrible. But this can really open your eyes to the idea that when you carefully choose an omnivorous diet, so eating meat, you can, source from a humane local farm. You might actually cause fewer animal deaths on a strict vegan diet reliant on industrial agriculture. There is no such thing as a vegan diet that is not reliant on industrial agriculture. And as someone who's worked in industrial agriculture, I don't think you can say shit to me about my diet choices unless you've actually seen what it's like and you've looked into that research. So you can imagine at that time, I was like, okay, so that's a great big lie. Let me re-examine the nutrition science and the history that I had previously been bolstered to my belief that animals and animal foods were just unhealthy. So when you go down the vegan sphere, you will find research that will highly convince you to adopt a vegan lifestyle. So one significant influence is that mid 20th century study by Ansel Keys. Oh my God, he's the Jesus of the vegans, isn't he? So when you look into the science, you'll see, so he's had a study that showed and linked high intake of animal fat to an increased risk of heart disease. So that's that 7-country study. It's iconic. It's often cited as proof that a diet high in meat and dairy clogs our arteries, right? So that's where we get that idea from. It's from Ansel Keys. It's the 7-country study. When you delve into the literature and you read I'm not even talking hundreds of counter articles, when this was released, there were hundreds of researchers who all created multiple papers to say, this paper is bullshit. There is evidence to prove against this. So when I looked into that literature, I discovered all of these controversies. So critics have long alleged that Keys cherry-picked the data. So this basically means he selected and only included countries that supported his hypothesis, while excluding others that did not, which is a huge no-no in research. The whole idea with research is that you have a hypothesis, you have a scientific method and a scientific way that you go and find that data that is non-biased. And so the whole idea is that you have a hypothesis and a good scientist will try and prove it wrong. So for example, the hypothesis here was if you eat meat, dairy, and eggs, you have a higher incidence of heart disease. So a good scientist will go to 50 countries and they will aggregate the data evenly and they will go, okay, this is what we have. And I'm going to see whether my hypothesis is proven correct or false. But he didn't do that. He went to 22 countries, but he chose to only plot the 7 that neatly lined up with his theory. And he left those out that didn't fit. So I looked at this research, I was stunned. I really built my whole dietary philosophy on that shaky foundation of that biased study, which had, again, multiple researchers were huge critiques of. So it really appears that rock solid evidence against animal fat wasn't as rock solid as all of these vegans, including myself, had been led to believe. So I was encouraged by this. I kept reading and what I found was pretty liberating. So over the last decade, multiple systematic reviews and papers have reevaluated the demonization of saturated fats specifically, so the kind found in meat, eggs, and cheese. And the consistent conclusion was that there was no significant correlation between saturated fat consumption and the risk of development of heart disease or overall mortality. So in other words, in lay terms, the simplistic artery clogging animal fat narrative is not supported by any modern high quality evidence. So I remember learning this and sitting back and reading a few systematic reviews and meta-analysis and going, oh, fuck, I've just been absolutely fooled. There is no evidence to prove this one huge idea that really backs the vegan sphere. And we have to think about it. Animal food is really nutritional dense. So generations of well-meaning people in the public sphere, your raw Varnas, your Ellen Fishers, right? They were avoiding nutrient-dense traditional foods largely because there was a mix of outdated science and sensationalism. And you have to remember as well, there's a lot of money to make. There is a lot more money to make out of a veggie burger than there is a beef burger. You know, the vegan sphere at that time and the vegan movement made a lot of money. And it's really interesting because it's actually starting to swing back now. I think Freely the Banana Girl, she has hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram at the moment. I find that very concerning because she's eating like spoonfuls of sugar and she's eating 18 bananas for breakfast and she's not eating any protein. That's very concerning. And I think it's definitely we're going to see veganism and vegetarianism becoming more popular again because of what's happened in the past few years. We've had a reaction to the vegan movement. And we've had the Paul Saladinos of the world. We've had the people who are telling us that the vegetables are poisoning you and killing you. We've had a bunch of people on animal-based diets or carnivore diets, and they are all coming out of the woodwork now saying how unhealthy it is. And so humans being reactive and extremists are going, okay, well, the answer is veganism. No. No, it's not. It's a balanced diet. Eat everything. Eat what makes you feel good. Eat what works for you. I digress. So I read all of this evidence. I was living my farming, I don't want to say dream, it was kind of a nightmare in the end. The day I made the decision to end my vegan streak, I did something I never thought I'd do again. I ate a plate of ethically sourced pasture-raised meat. And it sounds like so cliche, but I really felt that next day, I felt incredible. I felt like I'd finally eaten something that my body was asking for such a long time. Within a week, that fogginess I felt in my head began to clear. I remember my vision was better. I remember feeling like my vision wasn't as foggy. My thinking was really, really sharp. Over the following weeks, my energy levels rebounded dramatically. My periods came normal again. My cycle was regular again. I was finally as strong as my peers. I was farming. Sometimes it's incredibly hard work. I couldn't keep up. I remember my boss at one point pulling me inside and going, what's going on with you? Why? You're a young woman. You feel like you're about to fall asleep. And it was a week after I had that conversation with her, I started eating meat and she came up to me and said, oh my gosh, you're completely different. I said, yeah, isn't it crazy? So that was pretty interesting. When I did my labs, my B12 was fine. And that's because I was replacing some of my supplementation. So my vegan B12 supplement that I was taking, I was only taking it to finish it up because it was so expensive, because I was eating egg yolks again. And sometimes I was putting desiccated liver into meatballs and stuff like that. I felt a lot better. And when I tested my B12, it became really normal again. That was wonderful. I found it really easy to build muscle again. I had high quality protein and likely the creatine as well. So I wasn't supplementing with creatine back then, but animal meat does have creatine. So I was getting some creatine from there and more bioavailable protein as well. I was thriving. I felt like I was thriving and I realized that I had been surviving for years. And so now it's been about 5 years since I returned to meat. And I can genuinely say I've never felt better in my adult life. I've never felt better. And it's really far from those warnings from vegan doctrine that if you eat meat, you're going to feel horrible and then you're going to have this horrible rebound effect and, your body's going to reject the meat. No, that it doesn't work that way. If your body needs a certain subset of nutrients, it's going to welcome it with open arms if you have been deficient. The only thing that really I've had a hard time with, because I was vegetarian for a very long time and then I was vegan, I've only really been eating meat. I'm 30, so I've only been eating meat for about 10 to 12 years of my life. So my iron stores have always been a problem. I'm iron deficient at the moment. I've recently had my first iron infusion. I've always supplemented with iron. I have low stomach acid from being vegan. I can definitely say that's from being vegan. And now I can't really absorb iron properly. So that's a journey I'm still going on. And that was really shocking to me that even years after, I still have low iron and my body is not having a great time with holding on to iron. So that's something that I'm doing. I'm supplementing with iron. I'm watching my iron. My doctor and I are onto it. We're doing transfusions when it sees fit, and I'm just being very gentle with it. I'm taking Shilajit as well, cast iron pans, eating red meat, the whole kit and caboodle. But that is something that is still there. That is still a shadow of my vegan journey. So to kind of wrap it all up, I just want to give you a few lessons learned and a few reflections. So number one, listen to your body. No matter how intellectually convinced you are about your diet, your body's feedback is paramount. So when you ignore your persistent fatigue, your pain, your warning signs for the sake of ideology, it can be very, very dangerous. I learned from my own experiment to advocate for my health if it was failing. If something is wrong, believe it, even if the book says it's fine. Number two, one size does not fit all. There is no universal diet that's perfect for everyone. Some individuals genuinely thrive on a well-planned vegan diet for life. I think Ellen Fisher is a fantastic example of that from the outside. I don't know Ellen, I've never met her. I don't know her in real life. When you look at her life from the outside, she has birthed what, 10 kids now? She seems like she's thriving. Does a vegan diet work for her and her family? Yes. I don't think you can really go against that. Did it work for me? No, it did not. My vegan diet was well planned. I was supplementing everything. I was doing my labs testing. I was eating a high carb, low fat that was supported by the Australian Dietary Guidelines. I still suffered. So genetics, life stage, medical conditions, and individual nutritional needs will vary greatly across the lifetime. And it's really simplistic to insist that every person on earth can live a vegan diet. Everyone can do it. Human dietary needs are complex and diverse, and they're going to change. They're always going to change, especially as a woman. What you eat as a child and what you eat as a cycling woman, what you eat when you're pregnant, what you eat when you're postpartum, what you eat when you are perimenopause, menopausal, and when you're elderly, it's going to be different. Saying that one diet is going to be good for everyone, no matter what, is a huge problem with that. Number three, do your research continuously. Never stop doing it. It's easy to latch onto popular studies, so the 7-country studies, or documentaries without digging deeper. So what I've learned to approach with nutrition science is healthy skepticism, and always knowing that if a study comes out tomorrow and disproves it, we have to follow that. That's how science works. So, for example, when you have a study that links animal fats to something like heart disease, you have to look at who funded the research, who benefits from this research, how data might have been cherry picked, whether new evidence contradicts old assumptions. You have to stay informed with current high quality research. It's crucial because scientific consensus can and always does evolve over time. I think a really great example is this understanding that we have of red meat being the most inflammatory meat. A meta-analysis came out in early 2025, and it basically said that white meat, so chicken specifically, has higher inflammatory outcomes on the human body. And what had the least was red meat. And so that really shocked the nutritional world. That shocked me as well, because that's a belief that we just hold, that white meat, for some reason, we see it as less problematic and more pure, I guess. And it's really interesting when vegetarians and vegans give it up and they start eating meat again. Red meat is literally the last thing they go for because it's the thing that they're scared of the most. And I think it's because processed red meats are carcinogenic. When we smoke meats and when we cook them and we char them, it is carcinogenic as well. But if you're cooking meat on a reasonable heat, you're cooking it with a high smoke point oil, it doesn't actually have the same inflammatory metric as chicken, for example. Number 4, ethics are complex. So black and white thinking, all about food ethics, has given way to more nuance in my lifestyle, at least. So all forms of food production have impacts on living creatures. It's about striving for the most compassionate and sustainable balance. So consuming only plants does not equate to zero harm. It just shifts the harm out of sight. We don't have that much information in the forefront of our documentaries on its impact on native wildlife. When we actually look at cows, and this is a really good example of a documentary I've watched recently, I've forgotten the name, but it basically outlined when you're doing cropping, you need flat surfaces for miles. And so very often those places are very heavily forested. And so you have to deforest them. So when you take wild environments that are flat and you deforest them, you are killing off biodiversity and you're killing off all of the animals that live there as well. And then you're using heavy machinery that kill whatever is left there, and you're putting pesticides like glyphosate in that area as well. When you take animals like sheep, goats, pigs, cows, for example, you don't necessarily have them on the nicest, flattest pieces of land. Sometimes you can, but it's not absolutely necessary. These animals are ruminant. They have been traveling across the globe for a very long time. That's what they used to do. They would come in seasons. And so they are very used to being able to survive on different terrains. Where I live, there are these two goats that I see near the road, near my house, all of the time. And I have seen them scaling a limestone cliff. No worries. They don't need these really beautiful big pastures of flat land. No, we need that for agriculture, broadacre cropping, because it's easier to maneuver machinery on them, or we can have straight lines of crops. It's easier to water those areas as well. So very often ruminant animals, if they're being farmed consciously, are on areas where we can't even really farm vegetables and fruit anyway. So you have to keep that in mind, and you actually have to think about agriculture when you're thinking about ethics and you're thinking about the environment. It's probably going to be better off for you to get a freezer and buy a half a cow with your neighbor than it is to go to Woolies and supporting factory farming. Don't get me wrong. You're probably going to be better off, if you can't do that, to just go to your butcher and speak to them. Where is this meat from? How was it killed? How can I support that farmer? Go to your local farmers market and speak to them. I'm so lucky in Tasmania. When we go to the markets, the person who owns the farm, who reared the animals, who killed them, who took them apart and butchered them, is there selling it. And you can ask them everything about it, and they would be delighted to talk to you about their farming processes. And sometimes they're like, do you want to come have a look? I think that's a really great opportunity. Hopefully, in sharing my story, I don't aim to attack veganism or vegetarianism. I don't want to deter anyone from if that works for you. I think that's wonderful if it does. I just want to illuminate how we have these unspoken realities of veganism, like any diet, is not without potential downsides. And I think that's the thing about veganism that was really sold to me in my earlier adult years, was there is no fault with this diet, and there absolutely is. There is a fault with every single diet. There is a problem with every single diet, no matter what you do. We should feel free to discuss and address these openly without fear of stigma. And I still hold these core values of compassion, health, and environmental stewardship really closely to me. It's part of the reason why I grow my own food, because I know how much of an environmental impact agriculture has on our environment in many different aspects. So if you can grow something, please grow it. But like that journey from fervent vegan to thriving omnivore has taught me that true wellness is about listening, learning, and letting go of the dogma that no longer serves you. And for that lesson, both from my former self, vegan self, and my current self, are profoundly very, very grateful. I'm very grateful I went through that experience, because it's given me a lot of foresight into the environment, how agriculture works. You know, I would have never farmed if I hadn't been vegan. I would have never known how food systems worked. And I would have never had the insights that many nutritionists and health practitioners don't have on these food systems that I now do. So the question is, how can we as a diverse community share both the successes and struggles of our dietary paths to foster understanding and growth for everyone involved, for the sake of our health and for the sake of environment? And I think that's a far more interesting concept. I think now it's a lot better. You know, the vegan sphere in 2012 to 2018 was absolutely insane. We are seeing it slowly creep back. Part of the reason why I wanted to make this little solo podcast today. But I want to hear about your stories. Were you vegan? Were you vegetarian? Did you give it up? Were you an omnivore and went the other way? What are your insights? What are your stories? What are the things you've noticed? I want to hear about it both ways in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, and you felt like it imbued you with some education and insight that you can not only apply to yourself, but maybe allow you to understand someone else in your life that you really love, please like, subscribe, share, do whatever you can to reciprocate a little bit of love for the pod so we can keep this good thing going. I hope you have a really gorgeous morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you on the next one. Hooroo!